here's Steve Simmons here. You know David Morris, you know myself, Candid, Frank Stanishi. The Grey Cup just happened a couple of weeks ago, and I've been fortunate here. We're fortunate to have Steve Simmons, who has the long view of the Canadian Football League. Steve, you've been around for a while. I have to say that the Canadian Football League has changed a lot over the years. For you, I guess, can you give us an idea of where the CFL's been, where it needs to be, and all that stuff in your mind?
Well, that's not a question. That's it. That's an essay, and I probably would need weeks to go into all of that.
Yeah.
What I can talk about is what I'll call then and now. And then I lived through the bankruptcy of the Calgary Stampeders as a beat guy covering them. I lived through the bankruptcy of the Saskatchewan Roughriders as a CFL reporter. I lived through the Argos and Ticats not having owners. I lived through a Grey Cup where we weren't sure there was going to be a league the next year. And so I lived through American expansion that failed. We've seen a lot of things that have happened. And I think in many ways, this is the strongest 9 teams. None of them are going out of business. None of them are going bankrupt. None of them are about to disappear in the CFL that I can remember. And nobody's talking about the league dying. You know, that there are people upset about things. But I've been through areas where you wondered really what was next year and what was next week. And, you know, I was at the meeting where, the Calgary Stampeders were essentially out of business. And a few years later, they were the model franchise in the league. I was involved with coverage of the Saskatchewan Roughriders being bankrupt. And the last 10 years, they have been the financial model of the CFL. So, sometimes what is one time is not 5 years or 10 years later. The one thing we do know is CFL isn't big enough to be great, and so far it's not small enough to be gone.
Very good. That was a good essay. Cole's Notes version, I think,
Yeah.
would be fair to say. Cole's Notes version of the essay. I totally agree with you, and everything you said there is basically what underlines the existence of the Canadian Football League. They've had to deal with issues, and they've succeeded in overcoming a lot of peril. There's been a lot of peril, and I think the fans of today, to what you said, because this is, I believe this as well, and that is the fans of today who are concerned about the status of the league today obviously weren't around when there were real concerns that the league needed to worry about. And you're 100% right about the ownership. There hasn't been a better set of 9 owners ever in the Canadian Football League, in my memory.
Well, all of these people who are screaming about the rule changes that Commissioner Stuart Johnson brought in mid-season for next year and the year after, I would openly debate how any of this is going to affect play in the league realistically. And I would openly debate how this is leading to, quote, the Americanization of the league, which I keep hearing. And I'm shaking my head.
Yeah.
I mean, I have been at times where you thought about going to 4 downs, and you thought about, what the future was, and you thought about becoming farm teams, and you thought about all those things. They're still playing with 12 players. They're still playing on a wide field. They're still playing with 3 downs. They're still playing with the no yards rule. They're still playing. Some of the rules that they've actually made. My favorite one is the moving of the goalposts. They opened up offense, and these idiots across Canada are screaming about it. You've opened up possibility of touchdowns. Before there were no possibilities of touchdowns over the middle because the goalpost got in the way of every throw.
Steve,
so now you've opened up a portion of the end zone, and people are saying, "Oh, this is the end of the league as we know it." Well, it was a great song by REM and also the Atlantic, that Atlantic band that did "The End of the World as We Know It," but it isn't the end of the world. And God, I wish the Peter Diakowskis and all these people who are screaming, I don't know honestly, I'd love to sit here right now with one of them. Tell me where this is all changing, because I don't see it.
If I can arrange it, we'll make it happen. I apologize for the dark glasses. They're progressive. I was out shoveling snow, and look how long it's taken to come back to the right color.
Steve, I think I just watched a clip. I was playing on TSN where it was a misplays, and one of the misplays was a quarterback. I think it was Caleros throwing a ball into the end zone and hitting it off the goalpost. Like, to me, that's embarrassing. That something like that can negate. You have this massive end zone, but you decide to put this big obstruction right in the middle, and that takes away the potential for touchdowns. Like, I don't know where people get off thinking that it's going to totally ruin what the league has to offer.
Well, I have friends. They're Argos season ticket holders. They go to every single Grey Cup. They're that kind. We've all known those guys because, frankly, you see the same 42 of them at every single Grey Cup. They say they're not going anymore. That the league is now ruined. And I'm thinking, like, for more than 15 years at commissioners' press conferences and other availabilities, I have been asking commissioner, why does the league award a point when you miss a field goal and it goes into the end zone? Why should you get a point for doing something wrong? And no other sport, you don't get a half a goal for hitting a goalpost in hockey. You don't get something if you try to slam dunk and you hit the rim. You don't get anything in basketball for that. Why would you get something in football for missing? Well, now they've taken that away, which I think was a great thing. And people are yelling and screaming about that. So I think what's happened is there's just a group of CFL followers who can't stand change of any kind. And can only scream about what's in front of them without ever an answer to any of the questions that plague the league year after year after year after year. And so to all of those people, again, I am open to debating any of them, and I'd love to, like, if you're walking down the street and you meet an American football fan and you want to talk to him about the game that you love. In fact, I love football. That's the game I love. So it's American football, it's Canadian football, it's high school football, it's college football, it's the OVFL when I was watching my kid play. I just love the game. But if you were to ask someone to explain the Canadian game to an American who's never seen it, first thing you're going to say is, oh, you play 4 downs, we play 3. You play with 11 players, we play with 12. You play with a thin field, we play with a wide field. You play without much motion, we have all kinds of unlimited motion. We, in fact, have offside for wide receivers on virtually every play that we run, and nobody seems to care to call it. But all of those things are completely different. And yet, how we lost the thought that this was our game leaving? Well, every league could use rule changes, frankly, to make them better. I can't think of. I could sit down right now. If you asked me, can I make 5 changes in the NFL? I'd make them right now.
1,000%.
It's tantamount to somebody buying a new suit, new shirt, new tie, a new pair of shoes, and then people complaining that the socks aren't the right color.
Well, there's another thing.
I don't get it.
There's another thing in this. The CFL has had a lot of crappy commissioners. They've had a lot of guys who talked a good game, but really didn't play much of a good game. So finally, they get a guy who's bold enough to actually do something. You may not like it, you may argue it, but he's bold enough to do something different. And what's the first thing that everybody jump? Kill this guy.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking to myself, Randy Ambrosi, like, he tried to bring football to Europe so they could bring players in for the CFL. How'd that go? You can go through what did Mark Cohan do? What you can go through guy after. Most of the commissioners don't do anything because most of them are pretty lousy. Jeffrey Orridge might be the worst of them all. He didn't even know what the CFL was. But you've got a lot of commissioners over the years who have done nothing. Here's someone trying to do something. Now you can go. I don't like him taking out the 55-yard line, for example. I didn't see any reason for that. But everything else he did, I thought that you can make a pretty good argument for it.
I think it's important that that when we talk about the different commissioners, I think also, Stephen, you know this better than anybody, that only recently, only in the past few years, the owners have since the owners have become bigger corporate partners, they have more of a bigger picture of how the league should be, with an understanding. For example, MLSC understands other sports better than maybe some of the other teams do. The point I'm trying to make is that ownership is becoming a little more willing to listen to the commissioner. Not, and I'm not suggesting because of desperation, but because they finally accept the fact that each one of them can't expect everybody else to work the way they operate. So now they all have to figure out a better way to operate for all of them. And that's what I think is the difference with this commissioner, and why this league is ready right now for a commissioner like this.
Well, it's funny. In sport, commissioner works for the owners. He's being paid by the owners to run their league. And in most cases, I'll use the NHL because I'm most familiar with it. The commissioner has a lot of power, and he gets a lot done, and he's done great business for the business of hockey and for that. The difference in the CFL historically, it's like being the Prime Minister of Canada, and you have 9 provinces, and not one of them, and all the provinces are like Quebec and Alberta. They don't really care about anybody else. They care only about themselves. So what are they going to do to make their province better? And that's what the CFL has been for way too many years. There's 8 or 9 franchises. This team wants to play on Saturdays only. This team only wants to play Thursdays because all the people go to the cottage on the weekends. This team wants to play at 2 in the afternoon. The other team wants to play at 4. Like, nobody can agree on what to eat at a staff meeting, let alone how they're going to fix the league in any way. And so it's been 8 or 9 teams operating as their own governments, and some poor guy in an office in downtown Toronto trying to bring everybody together. And historically, that's a problem, and that's been a problem. And I think Randy Ambrosie actually did a better job of bringing everybody together. And it might be because some of the ownership changed to where guys weren't, operating check to check, and he came up with a new owner in Edmonton and a new owner in Vancouver, and and Montreal, and all of those were what you'd call pretty considerable owners. Although we don't know how the Edmonton thing's going to turn out in the end. But having said that, it's a tough job because everybody has operated as their own government. It would be like being in charge of Russia when all the states were going into different places, when Latvia was leaving, and everybody was, Kazakhstan and all the other stands. They were all going, and you're trying to make sense of your country. Well, try to make sense of the CFL some days. It hasn't been easy. And that's why I kind of like what Stu Johnson did also with the rules, because he got those guys involved.
Yep.
And he had to get their approval to do what he did. And he got their approval, apparently unanimous approval, although they always say that. But having said that, I think they have a chance now to work together, which they really haven't had much of a chance for most of my time being around the league, because every franchise was operating almost like it would be like I buy a McDonald's franchise and I operate as a singular owner, as opposed to part of, the big league of McDonald's.
That's the key, and that's why I think this works better, Steve. Because if they look at if they're able to look at the bigger picture, and I think it's because the owners have become, and Randy Ambrosie, and I have it on some authority, that they have a list of owners that they're ready to put in if there's an issue somewhere. They have a list of owners already. Randy did do a good job at that. But all the ownership group, now you got deeper pockets, and those deeper pockets don't want to be like it's been over the years, where somebody ends up throwing their keys on the desk and goes, that's it. I can't run a team anymore. They have to run for a profit, and they have to accept the reality of what it takes to have a profit. And that's, I think, the hammer that Stewart has, is that they got to stop worrying about just survival. They've got to profit.
Well, I'm not sure profit is possible across the board. There's just too many franchises with too many questions and too many troubles that profit becomes impossible. But I think that what you hope to do is operate reasonably. That means you're not going to make a ton of money, and you're not going to lose a ton of money, and you keep the value of your franchise and the value of the league what it is. I don't see a way. I'll give you the, we're almost familiar with the Argos.
Yep.
I don't see a single way the Argos can be profitable. They can change ownership 42 times, and they have in the last 43 years, I think. But they can't be profitable. So you have to look and say, what is reasonable for our situation, considering how much money we have to spend and how much it now costs and all that kind of thing. And I think that's how you have to look at it. And yeah, the Winnipeg Blue Bombers can make money because they sell out every game, and it's different. But I don't know if teams in Ontario, the three teams in Ontario, or even Montreal, I don't know if any of the teams in the East can be in significant profit kind of circumstances, considering what the finances and economics of the league are.
What is it? What would be the igniter of profit? Like, what revolutionary? Obviously, then you're suggesting there would have to be something revolutionary done, a major change, or it's just not possible.
Well, here you take a look at what other sports are doing or other sports have done. Why is the NBA exploded? Why are players now making $50 million, $60 million? I think Shea Gilgeous-Alexander's next contract, he's going to make $82 million or something crazy like that. Why? Because of television money. And it's not just television money in North America. It's television money around the world. So there are people in China, the largest population-based country in the world, who love to watch the NBA. So China pays significant money for NBA rights. Same in Asia. Same in Australia. Same. You can go all around the world. The CFL has a market. That's the CFL, and it's a small American market. There's really no other market, and so where can they sell the game? Well, I'm not sure they can. What they can do maybe is create more demand on television in Canada, which they haven't done because they've kind of satisfied with, we have one network, they cover us, we like the way they cover us, and let's go from there. But I think if they look at I'll use the NFL right now. The NFL, how many networks are televising NFL games? Well, there's, I think, 4 on the weekends, a different one on Thursday nights. Now they're going to
Streaming
playoffs,
service.
and they're going to be on Netflix, and it's like NHL is going to Amazon and on Monday. Is it Monday night they're doing it?
Yes, yes.
Amazon?
Prime.
Yeah.
Prime. It just seems the other leagues have ability to move their product to other places to maximize their income and their revenue. The CFL really is whatever TSN is willing to pay, assuming that Rogers Sportsnet isn't interested in it. I would love to see them. I'd love to see Stu Johnson, the former president or CEO of TSN, put the CFL up for bid. Will any of the streamers be interested? Well, and do streamers want a product where the audience is older than most people who know what streaming is happen to be? And so they're in a really, it's funny. I had a conversation with Larry Tannenbaum maybe a year ago. Very short conversations, as all the conversations with Larry Tannenbaum tend to be. I had a conversation and I said to him, "Why did you pay so much for your WNBA expansion franchise?" At the time, I think he had paid $50 million US.
Yeah, I think that's what it was.
And I thought to myself,
It's a
he's
lot.
insane. I looked about 2 weeks ago. I think it was Forbes magazine had a list of the value of WNBA franchises, which obviously doesn't include the Toronto Tempo because they're not playing yet. The lowest franchise on their list of how many teams are in the league was 145 million. So Larry Tannenbaum has almost doubled and almost tripled his money, having never played a game.
Never sold a ticket.
Sports equity in every other league is the greatest buy in the world. I mean, you buy in, you sell out huge everywhere. It's NHL, NBA, NFL, it doesn't matter, baseball. The value of franchises has gone up exponentially. The value of CFL franchises has not, because there's not enough outlets of economy for them to deal with. And they're dealing only really with one country.
Yeah, we
Steve-
agree 100% with you on this show about having more people broadcast the games. 100%. It breeds competition within the industry, and they figure out ways to figure out how to draw people to watch the game rather than have one group that's satisfied, have more than one, and it gets a little better.
Well, there's a sorry, David, there's a built-in problem with Canadian broadcasting. And the built-in problem is this. There are two huge sports networks. They invest heavily financially and product-wise in what they televise. They don't invest heavily in what they don't televise. So you take TSN, for example, which shows the CFL, but doesn't have Major League Baseball. Well, they didn't have anybody covering the Blue Jays until there was a couple weeks left in the season. In the greatest Blue Jays season probably we've ever seen, going back to the World Series years. They just we'll just put a guy on and say a few words and go on to the next day. You know, I'm a newspaper background guy, so we never looked at things from a rights holder point of view. We look what's worth covering, what's not worth covering. Sportsnet ignores the CFL for the most part on the air. They ignore some of the things that they don't cover. To me, it's a stupid way to do business, because if I'm watching either of those networks, they don't know at home what I'm interested and what I'm not. They don't know at home if I'm a Blue Jay nut and they're going to give the Blue Jays, the short shift because there was a CFL game that night. Like it makes no sense to me. You cover what you should cover. Both networks should do the same, and they would make both their products and the other guy's products better while doing so if they did that.
Well, competing interests in providing the best story, best coverage of what people are looking for. What's the most newsy thing happening, and not just what is a part of your portfolio.
I work for a company, like a lot of stupid newspaper companies now, that everything is judged by clicks. How many clicks does this get? How many clicks does that get? How many people are interested in this? And if you go by what people read on our website, if school teachers are having affairs with 14-year-old students, that's the story everybody wants. That will be your top click of the day. It won't be, the prime minister messed up with Donald Trump or something like that. It will be one of those kind of, nutty stories. And I'll give you an example. We don't, because it doesn't get enough online traffic, cover the Argos the way we used to.
Mm-hmm.
We've almost stopped covering the Argos in some ways. So every once in a while, I'll sneak out and do an Argo column. It's not sneaking out. It's just what I do. And I'll decide, because it's that day or that game or that moment or something happened with the quarterback, and who knows what the story is. But I just decided it's a column. So what happens is Ryan Dinwiddie leaves the Argos as head coach to take the job in Ottawa. And, I wrote my boss and said, I'm going to write a column on this happening. And he said, well, we don't really like it when you write CFL, but it's okay. Go ahead. And it turned out that I really wrote more Mike O'Shea than I wrote Dinwiddie in the column, because, the whole thing was, if you lost your coach, go get the best one. And the best one's from this area and used to play for you and is close friends with your general manager. Like what could be more natural than that? And I also found out that, for the column, that within 7 days, because I had to wait 7 days to get permission to talk to O'Shea after the Winnipeg had played in their last playoff game. So I write the column, and I'm dreading, in a way, that the next day I'm going to see that 11 people read it, or something stupid like that. And we get our numbers sent to us almost every day if we want to. You can find out each day, how many people read, and not only how many people read it, but how long they engaged in it. So you have a real sense of who's reading what. I wrote the piece on O'Shea, and I think it was the number 3 read that week in the paper. Not for me, in the paper. And it's like, for all you people out there who say, people aren't reading this because it's the Argos or CFL, People aren't reading it because you're not writing it well enough, in my opinion. Because that's proof to me on a day off, where something happened, that there's still interest. And when there's still interest, that means there's a reason to do something.
Steve, the same thing's true. For example, and I love the Argo organization. They're very good to us. They give us all the access we need. But they make an announcement that they're hiring a new coach, and they want you to come meet him in 3 hours, in 4 hours. It doesn't give a chance for organizations who may be interested in covering it, and to me, that's a lost opportunity. I don't know
No,
how you feel about it.
I'm going to disagree with you.
Okay,
I am teeing off with my friend Mike Zeisberger at Ballantree Golf Club, and we played the first hole, and we were just about to tee off on the second hole, and our phones are going zzz, buzzing away. Uh, Brendan Shanahan had fired Kyle Dubas. There's a press conference in an hour. Our day of golf was over. We went, got our rain check, got in our cars, went downtown, covered the thing. That's the job. The job isn't wait for people. The job, if you have an announcement to make it that day. Don't delay 2 days. Don't delay. Sometimes I think the opposite.
Control the
I think,
news.
what?
Control the news cycle, right?
Yeah. And I don't think it's we have to wait, because any single time there's an important situation, whether it's Sheldon Keefe being let go, or whoever, whatever it is, by a Toronto standpoint, Masai being let go, however it comes out. If they say be there at 2 o'clock, you're going to be there at 2 o'clock. That's
you
the
don't
way
think
it works.
you don't think the CFL is not in the same kind of position as the Leafs, the Raptors, where
They're not, but they still have to operate as though they are.
okay,
I think. I think you make them. If the minute you tell someone you're not important, then you're already not important. Don't tell them that.
See, I found at the moment the Chad Kelly story, that was probably the biggest frenzy of reporters when he was going to be addressing the media at that practice I ever seen at anything to do with the Argos. Sometimes it's just what the story is as well, right?
Oh, of course, and let's be honest. Bad news sells better than good news.
Yep.
At any time, a firing gets more clicks than a hiring. A Chad Kelly getting in trouble story is going to get more play than Chad Kelly winning the most outstanding player, because it's got a little scandal and a little bite to it. And so you just do what you do. You cover, what needs to be covered. And I think, frankly, I kind of enjoy dealing with the Argos, because I'll use an example. If I can't be there, if they're hired, I see they hired John Huffnagel today. If
Yeah.
they're hiring John Huffnagel and had a press conference, and I can't be there, I'm going to ask one of their PR people, "Can you get John Huffnagel on the phone for me?" And in most cases, they will.
Yeah.
And so, I wish, frankly, the Leafs or the Raptors would operate with some of the
Accommodations that the Argos
yeah,
did.
that the Argos do. And I like the way the Blue Jays operate. I think the Blue Jays PR staff is really top flight. I really like dealing with them. I think they do everything close to right, even though they're not working for the world's greatest people.
So Steve, when you look at especially with the Argos, you wrote and I read your column about the Michael Shea situation, and did you feel like there were really any chance that they were going to go with an outside candidate other than O'Shea, or you felt like nobody really wanted the job from the outside?
Well, my understanding, and I'm not going to say where any of this comes from.
Yeah,
My
that's fine.
understanding is they absolutely wanted Mike O'Shea, and they were going to do everything they could to make it possible to get Mike O'Shea. And so, start with this: they have to ask for permission to talk to him.
Yep.
And so they ask for permission to talk to him. Now, if Mike O'Shea doesn't want to talk to the Argos, all he has to say when he gets the phone call from the president of the team is, I'm not interested, thanks. And that's the end of the conversation with the Argos. But Mike O'Shea didn't do that. He said, so clearly he had some interest in listening. and he met with them, from my understanding, again for 2 whole days, and they went through the process of going vetting it, so to speak, 2 whole days, and at the end they weren't. Apparently, his wife didn't know what his decision was going to be when it came down to so there was still some back and forth that he was listening to, and I suspect, knowing how MLSE does business, that they were probably willing to pay him more, way more than he's making now, because he has not been hugely paid for all of his success in Winnipeg. So he had a chance to become hugely paid and chose to stay in Winnipeg rather than, as I wrote, take the money and run. And their next choice was Orlando Steinauer. Again, a player who played with pinball and coached for the Argos with Scott Milanovich, and had a very good record coaching in Hamilton after he decided he didn't want to coach anymore, and so they made a pitch to him, which I don't think lasted much more than a minute or so. I don't think he was interested. So those were the 2 choices, and then it became, where do you go after that? And I think this is where it kind of got sloppy. The Argos, interviewed, I think, virtually every coach on their staff, which is almost a silly thing to do. I mean, if you don't know the people on your staff, having worked with them every single day for a whole season, that guy could be a head coach and that guy can't. That's a pretty. So they went through that whole thing. I think they investigated Noel Thorpe in Montreal. I don't know how far that went. I know that they made a call on the Saskatchewan offensive coordinator, who said he had no interest in the job. And I know that they made it known, whether they actually never made a phone call about it officially, but they made it known through intermediaries that they had interest in Corey Mace. And he had no interest in them either. So the 3 people they probably would have picked 1, 2, and 3 were, I bet you, O'Shea, Mason, Steinauer. All 3 said no. And then it's like, where do you go from here? And they wound up going internally to Mike Miller, who's a very sound offensive quarterback coach of many, many years and a lot of experience. I can't for a moment tell you what kind of a head coach he's going to be. I like head coaches with presence. I've not seen that natural sort of presence you see sometimes from a head coach in football in particular, with Mike. But then again, I didn't think Ryan Dinwiddie, who won 2 Grey Cups with the Argos, had much presence. And he's one of the in the history of Toronto sports, he's one of the most successful coaches there's ever been. So God bless Ryan Dinwiddie, who's now in Ottawa trying to make sense of that mess. And Mike Miller's now the head coach of the Argos. And the only salvation I see in any of this is the fact that Mike Miller and Chad Kelly are very close and are very much believers in each other. And when Chad Kelly played the best football of his life, and he had Mike Miller as his almost personal coach. So we'll see what happens that way. But I don't know what you guys think, but I don't think the average Argo fan would have known Mike Miller if he hit him with his car.
And the worst game that he played as an Argo, I'm talking about him, was when Miller was sick and couldn't be there beside him.
Yep, he was.
You're the one that broke that story, Steve. That his
treatments,
right? Yeah. Not having him there really impacted him.
Yeah, and he and Chad, again. Chad's not the most forthcoming person. He's not the most open guy, and let's be honest, he's a little bit off. But he was really honest about how much Mike Miller meant to him, and how much he kept looking on the sidelines, sort of, for who's going to help me now, and he wasn't there. So let's see. Let's see what it becomes. Who knows?
Yeah, we didn't find out about that till you broke the story the week later.
Like I know somebody within the organization was telling me that they've been working with that quarterbacks coach because he was sick. But you don't truly get, because we thought Ryan Dinwiddie handle a lot of that stuff, right? Because he's the offensive coordinator, he's the quarterback guru. But then you hear about this guy Mike Miller, and then you start to put the pieces together a little bit more. So I can understand. I think that obviously, as you said, played a big factor. The relationship with Chad Kelly, maybe something that can rein him in a little bit more, and in that regard, and you keep a little bit of that continuity with that, and not having a new coach come in and have to kind of redo a lot of that. Um, but I think, yeah, you also talked a bit about the front office and kind of, maybe things weren't as rosy between the head coach and the front office, especially with John Murphy. Like, do you think that maybe played a little bit of a factor too in some of what's been going on with the Argos lately, and outside people looking at the organization too?
Well, it played an enormous factor in Dinwiddie leaving. Dinwiddie did not want to work with John Murphy, and Dinwiddie wanted to have much more control and say over personnel. So he was looking whether it was to extend his title, and he talked about this when they won the Grey Cup last year. He talked about becoming a GM and a coach at the same time, and whether that was possible, and he was hoping to be able to do that. And so Ottawa comes calling and offers him the double role, and at the same time, he can say to the Argos, I'll stay, but I'm not working with that guy anymore." And so the Argos essentially made a decision. Do we want to lose John Murphy, or do we want to lose Ryan Dinwiddie? I don't think they know they were going to lose the coach, but in the end, within 2 days, this all happened fast.
Yeah.
Within a few days, suddenly Dinwiddie's gone, and he was supposed to be the guy, and didn't happen. And now they have John Murphy and they have Mike Miller, and now they have John Huffnagel. Ooh, I'm still trying to figure out exactly how and where he fits in all of this. Sort of a lifer, a Stampeders lifer who's kind of been in semi-retirement the last few years.
MLSC has leaned on him many times. Some of the hires, they've gone to Calgary and asked their advice. That was public.
Well, he may have been, somebody recommended Dinwiddie.
And I think it was Huffnagel.
Okay, it might have been. Huff is a quarterback. Ryan is a quarterback. Huff was a quarterback coach. That's very possible. Huffnagel's an amazing football guy. Whether he is at this age anymore, I don't know. He's also almost deaf.
Yes.
He is very, very. It's hard to talk to him. I've found in recent years, partly because he just he can't hear, and he has hearing aids and all that, but he was both in the NFL and in the CFL a very instrumental person on how the game is played right now, and how slot receivers are being used, and how he did some really interesting things in his coaching time in the NFL, and he brought some of those things when he came to the CFL with the extra receivers and all that. And in Calgary, all these years around there, most of the time they've had pretty good quarterbacks and really good offensive teams.
Will he affect the management cap at all? I know there's
just about to ask that question, because I don't know how that works with that.
There's a line that they can put between them, consultants and management. Do you think, Steve, he's going to fit that? Because the money isn't there.
The next thing Stuart Johnson should do, if he hasn't done it already,
here we go.
Is get rid of that stupid thing.
I've been banging that drum ever since they implemented it. I said, why are you doing this to your league?
Let teams, why? Because teams aren't responsible enough to keep their salaries in line. But what it does is it means you're going to lose coaches, or lose the ability to get coaches of some quality, because you can't pay what they're worth. And so if you can hit your budget and make salary and make your coaching staff salary, there shouldn't be an absolute cap on it. It's ridiculous to have a cap on that.
Yeah, but it had roots in the second last negotiation they had with the CFL.
Oh, I understand.
The players are very upset because their contracts aren't guaranteed, but coaches' contracts are guaranteed.
Well, I'll give you one more. When I started covering the CFL, it was the Calgary Stampeders, and they had Jack Goda was the head coach, and he had an offensive coordinator and a defensive coordinator and an offensive line coach and a defensive line coach and a secondary coach and a special teams coach. I think his staff was about 6. And the great Edmonton Eskimo dynasty years, I'll bet you their coaching staff was 6 or 7 people. The average CFL staff now, I think, is around 14, 13, something like that. And so they've gotten a little out of control and adding this and this and this. You don't need all of that. And
What, you don't need a quality control coach?
yeah, I think that, I love the Argos one year. God bless one of the bad ownership groups of the many bad ownership groups they've had, but they went to I think the Tennessee Titans for the quality control coach, and I think they hired the worst football coach I've ever seen. And his name now escapes me. Oh, Bart Andrus.
Yes.
Oh, yes, yes, yes.
And
He had
his job
had a copy as a coach.
and what's funny about him is he was the quality control coach of the Tennessee Titans, which basically meant he sat in a room and watched film. That's all. So I once happened to mention to a player at the Super Bowl who was playing for the Tennessee Titans, "Oh, do you know Bart Andrus?" He didn't even know the name, and he was on the team when he was the quality control coach. So this is what the quality control coach does. The coach says to him, "Find me a tight end. Our tight ends are injured." And then the guy goes into an office and he watches 78 films of 78 different tight ends to come up with, the guy he's going to bring in for a one-day tryout. Excuse me.
It's crazy. And like the other thing too, like the Argos lost an assistant general manager in Vince Magri to the NFL, partly because they probably couldn't afford to pay him in any sort of increase that maybe the NFL was offering, and that's probably been one of the biggest losses that front office has had, because they don't really have somebody scouting the Canadian talent like he did. He built their Canadian depth through the draft.
Well, they had Chris Rossetti before they had Vince Magri.
Yes.
And Chris Rossetti was a reasonable Canadian college quarterback who then became way better at scouting and other things, and came to the Argos. And within almost 2 years of being there, I think maybe 3 years, I don't know how long he was there. He wasn't there very long. He wound up being hired by the Miami Dolphins, and then since by the New York Giants. And he's just a guy that, when people meet him, he knows his football and he understands, and he was able to do the job very well. It's hard you can't compete with the NFL if they want one of your guys.
Yeah.
That's a fact. If Mike Miller was someone the NFL wanted as a head coach, then he would probably make 10 times as much or more to be a head coach in the NFL than he's getting paid to be, the Argos' next coach. It's just the reality. If you're a practice roster player in the NFL, practice roster, you're making more than the majority of CFL players are making. If you're actually on the roster, even as a rookie, your rookie salary guaranteed is more than maybe 2 or 3 CFL players. So you can't get into how you can compete. You can't compete. So you can't, if somebody wants Vince Magri because he's done a great job, then you're not, even if you have an unlimited budget to hire people, you're not going to be able to, because between the 40-cent dollar and all of that, it's just not it's not an equal playing field. And if the NFL wants a guy, they're going to bring a guy in. And I say, God bless Vince Magri and Chris Rossetti, because what they're showing is there's probably a lot more of those guys. Yeah. Probably I bet you Ted Goveo could have done those jobs when he was the GM in Hamilton. Like, there's probably a lot of guys in the league that could be doing those jobs if they pursued it that way. And that way we get more Canadians working in the game, and I think that would be great for football across the board. Because the one thing we're seeing, I think there's 32 Canadians in the NFL this season. And in some of the cases, it used to be all offensive and defensive linemen and the odd long snapper. You're seeing 2 almost starting running backs now Canadians.
Receivers,
You're seeing receivers. You're seeing
running backs.
a great young tight end with the New York Giants. You're seeing a lot of we're producing for the size of the country and the number, not even the size of the country, the number of people actually playing minor football in Canada or high school football in Canada. It's a pretty small number. And you look at the number of players we're producing per capita, it's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
And I think, if anything, the game should be advertising this to show people how great Canadian players have become. I mean, we get to see the Brown twins on one commercial I see on television. It's on way too often, but for the most part, we don't celebrate, how great Theo Johnson is, or
Exactly.
anybody like that.
Yeah, I got a message from somebody because in the Jets game, Qantas Stiggers, a former Argos player, made that play on the punt, the fumble that led to a Jets touchdown. like things like that where, yes, it's tough to lose guys to and I wrote about Qantas Stiggers. Like that story was, I think, just, considering the guy never went to a major college, made it into the CFL at such a young age, and then got on the NFL radar to get drafted to the NFL. Like those are stories that should be celebrated because yes, the CFL was a stepping stone for him, but it's in a good way. It makes the league, gives it a little more credibility that somebody can play at a high level there and make it to the NFL.
And sometimes this is where I will blame the teams for not doing a good enough job of letting people know where these hidden gem stories are. Yeah. And I'll use, Stiggers as one of those guys because he's playing for the Argos. He's starting I think he's almost a teenager, but he's starting as a guy who's never played college football. And he's starting going on later to win the Rookie of the Year.
Yep.
And I'll use Mike Hogan or Chris Balanovich, shouldn't one of them have got on the phone to Bruce Arthur or Paul Kelly or one of the major columnists with one of the major papers and say, I got a good one for you here. This is a great story. This guy is an absolute natural. He's only going to be here 1 year. He's going to go to the NFL. He's going to be drafted. First player ever drafted out of no college football. There's a story here, and you can go right back, and I'm sure you sit down with this guy, they'll give you the whole thing. That's where I blame them sometimes. They don't think outside their own box sometimes. They're too busy, bitching about no one's covering us or nobody's doing this or no one's doing that. Mm-hmm. Sometimes, you know what? You got to spoon feed somebody.
Yep.
Especially guys who aren't around and don't know it. But I tell you what, everybody in major media positions does know: a great story. A great story sells. We love great stories. That was a great story. That's a great story I wish I had written or known about before it became everybody knowing about it. But again, it wasn't presented to really anyone in that way, and it should have been. That's when your PR staff really earns their money, when they slide you one of those. And it happened. It's happened in other sports.
Well, you have to pay attention after that happens and figure out how to see it coming too, because that was an interesting situation.
True. I don't know if
it was a great story, especially because the reason he didn't play college football. The whole story about him was a great story.
I don't know if you know the name or even remember the name Charles Bourgeois. Charles Bourgeois was a defenseman in the NHL for the Calgary Flames and the St. Louis Blues, and maybe somebody after that. Played at university hockey in Canada. He didn't get drafted in the NHL, didn't get drafted into junior hockey. So he's playing at the time for the St. Louis Blues, and I knew Charlie because he played for the Flames when I covered them. I knew him as a really nice kid and a really funny kid, but I didn't know him beyond that. And one of the PR people comes up to me one day and said, "Do you know his background?" And I said, "Yeah, he's from New Brunswick." "Why?" I said, "No. Do you know his background with his father?" I said, "No." He said his father was an RCMP officer who was kidnapped in some hostage situation, dug his own grave. They shot him and buried him in the grave that he had dug for himself. and it was front page news in across Canada and in New Brunswick, obviously back in the day when it happened. And so I'm sitting with Charlie one day, and I said, "Do you ever talk about your dad?" And he pulls out his wallet and he shows me his picture, and he says, "Yeah, I carry him with me everywhere I go." And then we start talking. I said, "Do you mind if we, talk about this?" And we got to talking about this. And I wrote, I think, one of the best stories I've written probably in my career, on this marginal NHL player who, has been trying to be the father of his family since his dad was buried alive in New Brunswick, by criminals. You can't, that kind of story, those kind of stories to me are, I call them money. Those stories are like money, you just, um, and they're out there. They're out there all the time.
Yeah.
I remember when the Argos were one of their Grey Cup teams, and they all kind of mesh into each other the last several years. But they had a Toronto-born defensive back who had grown up homeless in the city, and he had tried to play some college football in U Sports, but couldn't afford to stay with Concordia, and I think wound up playing for the Calgary Colts somehow, and wound up he had to he it was just a long and convoluted and challenging story. And right after the Grey Cup, he was buying his first condo, and it was like homeless guy now has a home. And it was just and it was funny. I wrote the story, and a day or two after the story, I got a phone call from a movie company, and the movie company said, are you interested in making this as a movie?" Well, I said, "Don't talk to me. Talk to the person whose story it is."
Is that Jermaine Gabriel?
It was Jermaine Gabriel.
Yeah.
And he opened up again about all the stuff. But if I don't get a tip from somebody about something, you're not going to know, what the background is, or what he's come through, or all the rest of it. And so, everybody needs help at every level to tell every story. And I think sometimes we don't do a good enough. We collectively as media, and we collectively as an industry, don't do a good enough job of telling the stories as best we can.
No, you're certainly right. No, for sure. Like I think there's always like that's the thing, especially in the CFL. There are players who have gone through some tough situations to get to where they are because a lot of them, especially the ones that come from the States. I remember when James Wilder Jr. was up here, he had to work as a construction worker in the off season because by what this guy was one of the best emerging running backs in the league, couldn't afford because by the time he got his rookie salary and the taxes, and then you convert the salary from Canadian to US, it's like there's not really much there.
Yeah.
So,
Do you guys know Perry Lefko?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, Perry Lefko covered the CFL for the Toronto Sun for many, many years, and he did a fabulous job of uncovering what I call difficult stories. One of the best ones he did was the year Grey Cup was in Ottawa, and Argos had a wide receiver by the name of Robert Baker, very good wide receiver, who had spent considerable time in prison before he had come to the Argos. And Perry sat down with him just before Grey Cup week, and he went into all the things, transgressions of his life, and all the areas that he was in trouble about and trouble with. And it's just a fabulous piece about. The weirdest part was after Robert Baker's career in the CFL ended, he wound up back in jail again. But but you read that kind of story, and you can't get those. That's one thing the CFL does and has, is a plethora of great stories. There are so many of them, and they're so different. And you know, and that's one of the things that continually, what's the word, um, sort of makes me interested in the league. Is
Foster.
I love those kind of stories.
Yeah, and there's a lot of those there are some of those in the CFL. It's just you need a. It's funny because once in a while, like the Stiggers one, I found out later in the year when I figured out when I first looked at his age. I'm like, wait, how old is he? And then I got to learn more about his story later in the season. I'm like, I wish I would have known this earlier, right when he started to get himself into that position and before the whole awards thing happened. So,
And then it became a huge story around the NFL draft
yep.
when he was picked. Suddenly it was a big story again. And if you're getting your story told on ESPN, you know,
ESPN eats up those stories too. Like
yeah,
how many of those you see at the draft every
they
year that they
yeah
talk about.
they love those.
This big, they're the big stories for sure.
Steve, the situation with the Canadian Football League and it's like you don't know what to fix first. You know, there's not enough fingers in the dike where there's holes in what could make the league a success. You know, you touch on the subject of writers. The Canadian Football League more and more, and you touched a little bit on ownership, publications not providing reporters to cover the game. Is something like what you talked about right now? If the league worked a little harder to help writers write interesting stories and end up in situations like you described, where you write a story about a guy that could be the coach of the Argos, and all of a sudden it's one of the most popular stories of the week on the Sun website. Is there something that can be done for the football writers? You're hinting at it. How would you approach that if you had the chance to reach the teams and say, "Look, I'm looking for stories." How would you be able to draw that information, that interest that you could possibly use as a writer? What would you recommend for other writers?
Well, what I would recommend, unfortunately, is that the ship has sailed. And what sailed isn't it's not about the league and it's not about the stories, it's about the newspaper industry. And the newspaper industry is flailing and it's not going to be around for very much longer. And the days of having one beat writer for, every team in the league or one beat writer for every paper or one like we all work in the Toronto area. The Toronto Sun doesn't cover the Argos, the Globe and Mail doesn't cover the Argos, and the Toronto Star doesn't cover the Argos. They all have enough people to cover the Argos. They just choose not to because they're not getting what they think is value for their dollar, I guess, in terms of how they're choosing to allocate. Used to go to Grey Cup, and every city would be represented by almost every city by a columnist. So you'd get, Edmonton at one time had Terry Jones and Cam Cole writing columns out of Edmonton, and Michael Farber in Montreal, or what's his name, the older guy, I forget now. In Montreal and Ottawa had Wayne Scanlon or Earl McRae, and you go and all of a sudden at Grey Cup it would be, and Super Bowl was like this too. Grey Cup or Super Bowls, every single city was represented and every single paper was represented. And now because Post Media owns pretty much every English language newspaper that isn't the Globe and Mail and the Star across Canada of significance, they think that one person can cover the Grey Cup for all 25 or 30 papers instead of having 30 people do it. And they think that's good enough. And maybe they're right and I'm wrong. But the day of going to even the World Series, which I recently covered, used to have a columnist or a baseball writer from every town that covered the majors at the World Series. And now what do you get? You get mostly the national writers, the ESPN and the Fox national people, and you might get a New York writer or a Boston writer, and then that's about it. No one from Chicago or no one from Cleveland or no one from Detroit or no one from all these places we're used to. Newspapers have stopped spending money on those kind of things, and that we're not. The teams can do all they want to try and fix that, but the Montreal Alouettes just played in the Grey Cup, and Herb Zurkowski, who's probably the best football writer in Canada, didn't get sent. And so and they're going to say, well, we don't see the reason to spend the money. Well, for years and years and years and years, they did see the reason, and there was a reason, because it it paid off, but not anymore. And so you can sit and deliver anything you want on platters to these guys. There aren't the people to do it. There isn't a willingness to do it, and I don't think it's changing. I think it's going to get worse before it gets better across the newspaper landscape, because eventually the papers are going to start disappearing. And and here's the thing: the CFL, I've always said, is an over 50 business. Your fan is over 50, your audience is over 50, your readers are over 50. Who buys newspapers? Nobody under the age of 45. I don't see anybody walking around with a newspaper. And so, it's self-perpetuating, blunder, if you want to call it that, but that's what's going on.
Well, it's been an interesting. I hate to end it on a negative note like that. What do you see? Just because I want to end it on a positive note. What do you see as a positive in the relationship that we witnessed between MLSE and the Buffalo Bills, in the context of the MLSE owning the Argos as well? Is there a way that, because I'm trying to find ways to scratch interest for the Canadian Football League, even if it's using the NFL, is there any reality in that?
No. People who like the CFL like the CFL. People who like the NFL like the NFL. People who like the Buffalo Bills like the Buffalo Bills. And one of the things that's where MLSE is wrong in all of this is it's a belief that's been made before that Toronto is a Buffalo Bills market.
Yeah,
Toronto happens to be close to Buffalo geographically. Toronto is a vast NFL market. And when we did a marketing study about 5 years ago, what we determined were that the Dallas Cowboys and the Miami Dolphins, and I forget what other teams, were all more popular in Toronto than the Buffalo Bills
I'm
were.
sure the Steelers.
Well, they found out when they tried having those games here, and they felt like a road team.
Yeah, but they screwed that up by the pricing and all the rest of it. But I'm saying there is no evidence that Toronto is a Buffalo Bills market, except that TSN happens to cover the Buffalo Bills like it is a Canadian franchise. But for the most part, there isn't evidence to that. And so, you can have all the relationships you want marketing wise, and I don't think it's going to add anything to their product. What MLSE needs to do, in my opinion, and do it with some verve, they need to get people in the ballpark to watch Argo games who look like the city of Toronto. Get on a subway, sit on the subway in Toronto and look around. Tell me what you see when you're sitting on the subway. Now walk to an Argo game and all you see are 50 and 60 plus white people.
Yeah.
Go to a Blue Jay game. How many women are at Blue Jay games? How many young women are at Blue Jay games? It's become a big deal for young women to be at baseball games. Why? Because Toronto is a where is it cool to be kind of city. And so it's cool to be at a ball game now. And so instead of going to the bar with 8 of us tonight, we're going to the Jays game. And that's what's happened. Now, the Argos need to, and MLSE needs to, find this audience of people from East India who live in Brampton, of people from Asian backgrounds who live in Markham, of people or anywhere else where any of these people are living. All of them. They're we're talking about, what is it, half the population now? I mean, I'm the son of immigrant parents. So we're all immigrants in our own ways. It's just kind of when we came in and how and through what channel. But the day of living on a white-only audience of 50-year-olds and over is you're walking to your death. You have to get kids involved. You got to get young people in the ballpark. You got to have Brampton Mayor Night or some, different things to get people. So you bring 5,000. So you give 5,000 tickets away to minor football and bring kids in and bring their parents. Maybe they'll love it. Maybe it'll be a great game. Maybe the atmosphere at BMO is pretty good, especially if you're in that one side. But nobody knows that because they've never been. And they've never turned it on TV because they have no interest and don't know about it. And so it's sort of self-fulfilling in a negative way. They have to get out and sell. They don't have to sell for the Leafs. They don't have to sell for the Raptors. Those things sell on their own. Soccer was selling on its own, not so much now. But they have to sell for the Argos. And they don't seem to know how to do that. And it isn't bringing Thurman Thomas in and Jim Kelly for some kids clinic. Because the last time those kids were, last time those guys were relevant as football players was 30 years ago. And when these 9-year-olds now who want to go to a clinic don't want to see some guy they've never heard of.
Yeah, it's pretty bang on. I said that you have such a big market, but you also have people who are looking for affordable options.
And that's what it's crazy about it. What do people want? They want affordable tickets. These are affordable. You can go and take your family to an Argo game for basically the cost of one Leaf ticket.
Basically.
And you know what? I think it's a great thing to, you got 2 kids, you want to take them somewhere on a Sunday afternoon? I think it's a great thing to do. But they don't know, not enough people know that. Not enough people have been, not enough people have had a chance to experience it. And if you don't, you're never going to know.
Well, one of the things that MLSC originally changed when they took over ownership of the Argos is they de-papered the game. They got rid of a lot of the fans that they were literally, they referred to them as they were papering the audience. So there were a lot of people that didn't pay to get in. They went against that. Do you think that was a mistake or?
No, I think they wanted to know the reason they did that. I think was they wanted to know legitimately how many tickets they were selling.
Right.
And they wanted to have a real sense of what that number was and where it was going. What I found is that even in dealing as a former season ticket holder, and I bought my season tickets when they moved to BMO, and I just dropped them a year ago. As a former season ticket holder, I can't believe how easily I dropped my tickets and how little anybody said, why. No one asked me why. Like, I don't know. I grew up, my father was a salesperson, so I grew up in sales. I grew up around sales. And I remember my dad saying to me once, if somebody who always bought this from me suddenly says, I'm not buying it anymore, my first question to them is why? What did I do? What can I do to help?
Yeah. What do I need to do to keep you?
Yeah. Anyhow, guys, I've been here for a long time, and I think I have to get
plenty
moving.
Plenty enough.
We appreciate it, Steve. This was great.
All right. Be well.
Thanks, Steve. That was Steve Simmons, Toronto Sun columnist. Wind him up and he can go for a while. A lot of information in that.
Yeah. Well, it's a lot of experience, right? Knowing the market, right? And covering the market. Knowing the current and past current challenges.
I just saw that a little bit of a contradiction because, like I said about giving a chance for people to come and cover the Argos, he said it himself that the teams should be more outreach on their part, and so that's two different situations that speak to two different approaches. I still think they need to have an approach of ensuring that the people that broadcast the message have a chance to do it. And he gave the solution to that, and that is that the teams have to be aware that not everybody can be there, and they need to be given an opportunity when that story's as hot as that person who's covering it can cover it.
I think he's right in that. Like, if you're gonna do this big press conference, you can't say we're gonna change the time because one person can't make it.
Yeah, no, that's not what I mean.
I think the best way, I think the way he said it was the right way. Because look, all right, we're doing this big press conference, but if you can't make it for the press conference,
exactly,
you get an opportunity. Like, I don't know if you saw, we had the press conference and we had a chance to talk one-on-one. It's usually the way that they do it in most cases. but then I just saw the Three Down Nation did an interview with Mike Miller.
Right.
If you no, that's one thing. You can make that availability. You can leave that. You can put that out there, but you also need people to be wanting to do it as well, right? And you have to do your best to convince and say, look, this is a story that's worth covering, and this is why. They're like, you know, we get once in a while I get told stories, right? Now it just depends on if I have the capability to write it. You know, like the Mike Miller story. It's not just I am putting together something. I'm going to see if I can get it published on Sports, and we'll see if they have any interest in it. If not, I'll publish it on my own. And I think that's one thing, Frank, with the CFL, the landscape has changed. Newspapers are not the main source. They're a source. That's where you get, you know, people who've known the business and all that stuff. But if you go and see other leagues right now, it's all online. Look at this format, Frank. We're talking in this sort of format. It's seen as a bit of a traditional format, right? But podcasts, you ask anybody now, 3/4 of people I talk to, all of them talk about podcasts. Very few people. Some go on the radio if they're coming home from somewhere and they're in the car and they'll throw on a show that they want to watch, whether it's like an Overdrive or used to be when it used to be primetime sports. Like they would throw that on. Now, hey, did you hear? Are you listening to this podcast? Did you hear what this podcast had to say? I'll give the CFL media community. There are a growing number of podcasts, but there's been a bit of an alienation of these podcasts too. Like we, as the CFL, maybe needs to start embracing, and you know, hey, you've got this podcast. How would you like to interview this guy? Make some of the players find out from the players. Hey, we want to get our names out there, get your stories out there. Who wants to go and hop on a podcast, right?
I totally agree. For me, this all started 2012 because there really wasn't anywhere to talk about the Argos at the time. It was already already disappearing then. You know,
what dedicated Argos there used to be the Argos fan cast. We have X's and Argos with Ben, right? He's probably the only Argos dedicated podcast. Mike Hogan at one point was doing the Double Blue Order. Was it the Double Blue podcast or something like that? He's not doing that anymore. Like, you need a couple things. Consistency. We're doing this once a week. We are technically CFL general, but we do cover a lot of the Argos. But there isn't a daily, like, you go and you look at the Jays, the Raptors, the Leafs, right? The three, those guys, daily coverage, you can find something new, updated somewhere. TFC doesn't get it. Argos don't get it. And the Marlies, for the most part, don't get it. But the Marlies, it's a bit of a different situation, right? Because they're a professional team, but they're
in the shadow of the Leafs. They suffer.
Yeah, right? Even the Raptors 905, right? You have to be a niche fan to really want, like, that's a very niche audience.
Absolutely.
But I do think Steve is right. You're the CFL, and I read this this was on November 21st. The CFL put out the metrics of impressions, growth on social, viewers in the 25 to 54 demographic do this many impressions and stuff like that, especially during the halftime show. And it's like, okay, that's one game. The one game of the year, it seems like you put all your effort in. What about the rest of the year? What about the off season? Where are you putting your investment to ensuring you're getting that crowd past your Grey Cup, right? And that, I think, is the CFL's biggest problem. Biggest problem, like right now, the news cycle is still fresh with a lot of things. The Mike Miller one, Trevor Harris, Frank just re-signed with the Riders, so he's back for next year, signing a 1-year deal. Not surprising. We were kind of waiting for that shoe to drop, but again, you got to find a way to keep the news cycle going. And what do? It's not always going to be the new stuff. It's going to be the other stories, as those stories that Steve is talking about. Hey, if you're looking for a nice off-season story to keep yourself now, look, I get it. Beat writers, everyone takes a bit of a break during the off-season, but it can't go totally dark either, right? Holidays, that's different. People are away from not some now. I mean, it's changed, right? Where the NFL's on things on Christmas Day. The NBA is now on Christmas Day. Like, there's still a bit of that, but majority of the time, okay, holidays, people are not as not scrambling to read an article on Christmas Day. Right? You can get a bit of a break with that.
There's availability, and that's important too. If there's availability, okay. Well, listen, I think it's amazing. The season was over a couple of weeks ago, and we did an hour. And
you think we have more to talk about now?
An hour and 16 minutes plus. To conclude your point, very simply, what we're talking about here is getting information that draws the attention of possible fans to the game. That's what needs to happen. What that looks like, we can debate till the cows come home. The point is, you're right about one thing: continuity, dependability, expecting something to be on, and you know where to see it, where to hear it, and where to be a part of it, and where to engage with it is very important. And the CFL might have a responsibility in that, and somehow fostering podcasts and helping them out. I'm not asking the CFL to do me a favor and give me a call, say, hey, dude, you want to talk to? How often do you want to talk to somebody? Hey, there's this guy that blah, blah, blah. But I'm afraid that's what they need to do, because I think to Steve's point, what he was saying was very simple, is that there's stories that are money. So the CFL has to recognize what could be money and help force feed, like he said, force feed people, right? So It is what it is. All right. He's David Morisuti. I'm Candid Frank Sanishi. Steve Simmons was with us. He lasted as long as he could. I think he had to go for a nap. Not just kidding. Thanks for watching.